Why don't you ever cry, Mom? Noah's question was as innocent and direct as only a 7-year-old's could be. He was sitting on the living room floor, meticulously assembling a colorful plastic castle, his brow furrowed in concentration. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. We had just finished watching a movie, a classic story where the loyal dog waits for its owner who never returns. I'd felt the familiar lump form in my throat, the prickle behind my eyes, but as always, it receded before a single tear could fall. Noah, on the other hand, had sobbed quietly into my side, and I had held him tight, stroking his hair until his small shoulders stopped shaking. I offered him a small, placid smile, a gesture I had perfected over many years. It's complicated, sweetie. He looked up from his castle, his blue eyes, so much like his father's, filled with earnest curiosity. But everyone cries. At school, even Mark cries when he falls, and he's the biggest. That doesn't mean it's a rule, I replied softly, my gaze drifting to the window, to the quiet suburban street beyond. How could I explain it to him? How could I tell my sensitive, kind-hearted son that my tears were stored away, locked in the walls of 3 houses I had never mentioned to him? How could I explain that I was the keeper of a legacy so heavy it had pressed the tears right out of me? I hadn't told him, or anyone for that matter, that I had inherited my grandmother Evelyn's 3 rental houses. But it wasn't the properties themselves that were the secret. It was what came with them. My grandmother Evelyn was not a woman who cried either. In all the years I knew her, from my earliest childhood memories of her smelling of lavender and baked bread, to the final quiet days in a sterile hospice room, I never saw her shed a tear. She had a strength that seemed carved from granite. Her smiles were rare but genuine, her laughter a low, rumbling sound that made you feel safe. She faced life with a stoic resolve that I had always admired and unknowingly absorbed. When she passed away, she left me a simple, handwritten will. My parents got her savings and her modest primary home. I, her only grandchild, was bequeathed the 3 small houses she had rented out for decades in the older working-class part of town. At the time, I thought it was a strange but generous inheritance. I was a young woman, just starting my own life, and the prospect of being a landlord was daunting. The lawyer handed me a box containing 3 large, old-fashioned skeleton keys, each tied with a faded ribbon of a different color, one red, one blue, one green. Along with the keys was a letter addressed to me in Evelyn's elegant looping cursive. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "these houses are more than just brick and mortar. They are stories. They are lives. And now, they are your responsibility. Do not sell them. Not yet. Live with their secrets for a while. Understand what they hold. You will know what to do when the time is right. And remember, my dear, some burdens are meant to strengthen our backs, not to be shed as tears." Her words were cryptic, imbued with the same quiet mystery she carried through life. I didn't understand them then. I visited the houses, of course. They were simple, 2-story structures, weathered by time, but sturdy. They were all occupied by long-term tenants who paid their rent on time and spoke of Evelyn with a reverence that bordered on awe. They called her a lifesaver, an angel, a woman who understood hardship because she had lived it. The first few years, I treated the houses simply as a source of income. It helped my husband and me secure a down payment on our own home, the one where Noah was now building his castle. I managed the properties from a distance, hiring a company to handle repairs and collect the rent. The houses were a silent, steady presence in the background of my life, but the weight of Evelyn's words never truly left me. "Understand what they hold," she had written. It was only after Noah was born, when I held him in my arms and felt a love so fierce it was painful, that I began to understand. It was then that I started to truly look into the legacy Evelyn had left me. I dismissed the management company and took over myself. I started visiting the tenants, not just to collect a check, but to talk, to listen. And that's when the stories began to unfold. That's when I discovered what my grandmother had truly bequeathed to me. It wasn't 3 houses. It was 3 coffins for sorrow, 3 vaults for unshed tears. And inside each one, a story was waiting. The story of why Evelyn and now I could never cry. The house with the red ribbon was the first one I truly visited, not as a landlord, but as an inheritor of secrets. It was a modest, gray-painted house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a large oak tree in the front yard dropping acorns onto the cracked pavement. The tenant was a woman named Eleanor Gable, who had lived there for nearly 50 years. My records showed she was in her late 80s, a widow, and had never been late with her rent, which she always paid in cash, delivered in a crisp white envelope to the P.O. box I maintained. My excuse for the visit was a routine check of the plumbing, a flimsy pretext that Mrs. Gable accepted with a polite, unquestioning nod. She opened the door before I had a chance to knock, as if she had been waiting. She was a small, bird-like woman, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her clothes immaculate. "Mrs. Gable," I said, extending a hand. "I'm Sarah, Evelyn's granddaughter." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "I know who you are, dear. I see your grandmother in your eyes." Her voice was soft, with a slight papery rustle, like old letters being unfolded. She led me into a living room that was frozen in time. The furniture was from the 1960s, impeccably maintained. The air was still and smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was a scent of stillness, of waiting. Every surface was covered in photographs in silver frames. A young couple on their wedding day, a smiling baby in a christening gown, a boy with a toothy grin holding a baseball bat, the same boy, older, in a crisp military uniform. There were no recent photos. The faces were all young, captured in a sunnier, more hopeful time. After a perfunctory look at the pipes under the kitchen sink, I accepted her offer of a cup of tea. We sat in the silent living room, surrounded by the ghosts in the silver frames. "That's my son, Daniel," she said, her gaze following mine to the photo of the young soldier. "He was a good boy, so handsome." "He looks very brave," I offered. A thin, brittle smile touched her lips. "He was. He went to Vietnam. He was so proud to serve." She paused, her teacup rattling faintly in its saucer. "He never came home. Missing in action," they said. For years I waited. Every time the phone rang, every time a car slowed down on the street, I thought it was him. The army sent a letter, then a man in a uniform came to the door. They were very polite. They said he was presumed dead. She looked at me then, her eyes clear and dry. A vast, empty landscape of sorrow. "How can someone be presumed dead, dear? Either they are or they aren't. I never had a body to bury. No funeral. No place to put a flower? It's hard to cry for someone who might just be lost, who might one day find their way home." The lump formed in my throat, thick and heavy. I could feel the sting of tears for her, for the handsome boy in the photograph, for a life cut short and a mother left in a limbo of grief. But the tears wouldn't come. "Your grandmother," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "She saved me. I had lost my job at the bakery. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just sat in this room, waiting. The bills piled up. I was going to lose the house. One day, Evelyn came and sat right where you're sitting now. I told her everything. I told her I had no tears left, that I had used them all up in the waiting. She didn't say much. She just listened. Then she took my hand and said, 'Eleanor, some sorrows are too big for one person to carry. Let the house carry it for you. Give your pain to these walls. They're old and strong. They can hold it.'" I stared at her, the cryptic words from Evelyn's letter echoing in my mind. "Understand what they hold." "It sounds strange, I know," Mrs. Gable said, "but that's what I did. I couldn't mourn him, so I gave my waiting to the house. I gave all the unshed tears, all the unanswered questions, all the silent screams. I gave them to this place. And your grandmother, she let me stay. She never raised the rent. She just said to keep the house nice, to honor the memories it held." As I sat there, the air seemed to grow heavier. I could feel it, a profound, crushing weight of a mother's 50-year vigil. It was an anguish so deep and so old, it had seeped into the very plaster of the walls, into the fibers of the carpet, into the still, polished air. It was the source of that scent I couldn't place, the scent of grief. I felt it pressing on me, a physical force. My own eyes ached, burned with the need to release the torrent of sadness I felt for her. But nothing came. It was as if the house, in holding her tears, was holding mine as well. I left Mrs. Gable's home that day with the first piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Evelyn hadn't just given a woman a place to live, she had given her a place to store her sorrow. The house itself was a memorial, a tomb for a grief that had no other resting place. And I, as the new owner, had inherited the role of guardian. I was not a landlord. I was a keeper of tears. Driving away, I glanced at the 2 remaining keys on the passenger seat, the ones with the blue and green ribbons, and for the first time, I felt the true weight of my inheritance. A week passed before I could bring myself to use the second key, the one with the faded blue ribbon. The weight of Mrs. Gable's silent vigil had settled upon me, a constant low-level hum of sorrow in the back of my mind. It was a strange sensation, to carry another's grief so intimately. My own small daily frustrations seemed trivial, And the impulse to cry, which used to surface during sentimental movies or when Noah scraped his knee, was now entirely absent, replaced by a deep, stony stillness. I understood now that my emotional well was being filled by another's ocean. The Blue Ribbon house was on a busier street, sandwiched between a laundromat and a small grocery store. It was narrower than the first house, its brick facade stained with city grime. The tenant was a Mr. Marcus Thorne, a man in his early 60s, according to my files. His rent was also paid consistently, but unlike Mrs. Gable's cash, his came as a money order, stark and impersonal. I knocked, and after a long moment, the door was opened by a tall, gaunt man with a face full of sharp angles and deep-set, intelligent eyes. His expression was guarded, almost hostile. A long, jagged scar ran down the back of his right hand, disappearing under the frayed cuff of his shirt. "I'm Sarah, your landlord," I began, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "I know. The rent is not due for another 2 weeks," he said, his voice a low baritone, rough around the edges like gravel. He made no move to let me in. "I'm not here about the rent. I was hoping I could come in for a moment. My grandmother was Evelyn." The name was a key, just as the piece of metal in my hand had been. The hard lines of his face softened almost imperceptibly. He stared at me for a beat, his eyes searching mine, and then he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, his tone shifting from suspicion to a weary resignation. The inside of the house was sparse and meticulously tidy. There were no photographs, no decorations on the walls. The air was cool and smelled of old books and dust. But what dominated the room, what drew all the light and attention to it, was a magnificent black grand piano. It was closed, and a thick velvet cover was draped over it, protecting it not just from dust, but from the world itself. It was the heart of the house, a silent, sleeping giant. "You're a musician," I stated, though it felt more like a question. He gave a short, bitter laugh that was more of a cough. "I was a pianist, a concert pianist, or I was going to be." He gestured vaguely with his scarred hand. "An argument with a piece of faulty machinery 30 years ago ended that particular dream." He didn't invite me to sit. He remained standing, his arms crossed, a sentinel guarding the shrouded instrument. "I was 25, he continued, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity. He was simply stating facts. I had just won a major competition. I was supposed to make my debut at Carnegie Hall a few months later. Instead, I was learning how to button my shirt with one hand." He looked down at his hands, first the scarred right, then the unmarred left. They saved the hand, but the fine control, the speed, the touch, that was gone. I can play chopsticks. Badly. The music is still in my head, you see. Every day. Sonatas, concertos. I can hear them, but they have no way out. They are trapped. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were not sad. They were burning with a cold, contained fury that had been banked for 3 decades. "I lost everything. My career, my fiancé, my future. I started drinking. I was angry at the world. I was about to be on the street when your grandmother found me playing, or trying to play, in a dusty bar for spare change. She brought me here." "She helped you," I said softly. "She did more than that," he corrected. "She understood. I told her that I couldn't stand the silence, but I couldn't stand the music either. I told her that my head was full of screaming notes and that I wanted to smash my hands against a brick wall until they were bloody pulp. She listened. For hours. Then she looked at this piano. It was hers, and she said, 'Marcus, this house can hold your music. It's an empty vessel. Give it your anger. Give it all the unplayed concertos, all the applause you never received. Let the walls absorb the vibrations of the music in your soul. Your rent is to let it be the caretaker of your silence.'" A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. The air suddenly felt charged, vibrating with a silent, frantic energy. It was the phantom music, the ghost of a million notes that had never been played. It was the crushing weight of a shattered dream. I felt the fury radiating from him, the decades of frustration and rage, and the house held it all, contained it like a battery. My own hands began to ache, a sympathetic thrumming in my nerves. The impulse I felt wasn't to cry, but to scream, to smash something, to let out the violent, frustrated energy that filled the space. The second coffin of sorrow was not for grief, but for rage. It wasn't for a life that was lost, but for a life that was never allowed to be. I had inherited Eleanor Gable's endless waiting, and now I had inherited Marcus Thorne's silent, screaming fury. As I left his house, the weight on my shoulders had doubled. I walked back to my car in a daze, the ordinary sounds of the city street seeming muted and distant. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the last key in my hand, the one with the green ribbon. 2 stories, 2 unbearable burdens held by brick and mortar, and one left to discover. The final key, the one with the green ribbon, felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. For 2 weeks, it sat on my dresser, a silent accusation. I was now a container for the grief of a mother's unending vigil and the fury of a stolen future. The 2 emotions coexisted within me, a discordant symphony of sorrow. I felt old, weary. When I looked at Noah, my love for him was fierce, but it was tinged with a new and terrible understanding of how easily a life could be shattered. The third house was in the most pleasant neighborhood of the 3. It was a small cottage with a cheerful yellow door and a garden overflowing with rose bushes. A white picket fence, immaculately painted, enclosed the small yard. Unlike the somber stillness of Mrs. Gable's home or the tense austerity of Mr. Thorne's, this house seemed to hum with a gentle, contented life. The green ribbon, I thought, suited it perfectly. The woman who answered the door matched the house. She was in her late 50s, with a round, smiling face and hair the color of straw. She wore a floral apron dusted with what looked like flour. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm and melodious. "My name is Sarah. I'm Evelyn's granddaughter." Her smile widened, crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Oh, wonderful. I'm Amelia. Please come in, I was just baking." The inside of her home smelled of cinnamon and yeast. It was cozy and cluttered in a comfortable way, with handmade quilts draped over the furniture and colorful abstract paintings on the walls. It was the absolute opposite of a place meant to hold sorrow. It felt like a haven. I felt my guard drop just a little. Perhaps this house was different. Perhaps Evelyn had just had one normal tenant. "Your grandmother was the kindest person I ever knew," Amelia said, pouring me a glass of lemonade without asking. "She gave me this place when I had nowhere else to go. She saved my life." "I'm learning she did that for a lot of people," I replied, my voice quiet. Amelia's smile faltered, just for a second. She looked at me, her cheerful blue eyes suddenly deep and searching. "Ah," she said softly, "so you know about the houses." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of shared knowledge. "I'm beginning to," I said. She sat down opposite me, her hands clasped on the wooden table. "I was 17 when I came here. Scared to death. I was pregnant. My family, they were very religious. They threw me out. I was going to have my baby and give it up for adoption. I had no money, no one. I slept in a shelter for a few nights. That's where Evelyn found me. She used to volunteer there." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the window, to the blooming roses outside. "She brought me here. She said I could stay as long as I needed. I had my baby, a little girl. She was so beautiful, perfect. I had her for 3 days before the adoption agency came. 3 days. I named her Rose. The lump in my throat was back, but it was different this time. It wasn't the dull weight of grief or the sharp edge of rage. It was a hollow, aching emptiness. "I never told anyone," Amelia whispered, her eyes fixed on the garden. "Not a soul. Not my husband, who I met years later and who passed away 5 years ago. Not my closest friends. No one knows that I have a daughter somewhere in the world, a daughter who would be 40 this year." She looked back at me, and now her eyes were glistening. But like Mrs. Gable and Marcus Thorne, the tears did not fall. They stayed, suspended in the bright blue of her irises. I told Evelyn I couldn't bear it. The shame of it back then. The not knowing. Wondering every single day if my Rose was happy, if she was loved. Evelyn sat with me the night before the agency came. I was crying, holding my baby, and I told her I didn't know how I was going to live with this empty space inside me forever. She took my hand and pointed to the walls. She said, "This house will be her room. Give your secret to this house. Fill it with all the love you can't give her. Fill it with all your hopes for her. Let the walls hold the life you can't be a part of. This house can keep your secret safe." And then I felt it. Beneath the smell of cinnamon, beneath the cozy clutter, was a profound hollowness. It was the echoing silence of a life never lived within those walls. It was the phantom weight of a baby's head in an empty cradle. It was 40 years of a mother's secret, silent love, a love so deep and so painful it had to be locked away. The house didn't hold grief or anger, but a ghost. The ghost of a daughter named Rose. It held the unbearable weight of a mother's deepest regret. I left Amelia's cheerful cottage feeling utterly hollowed out. I now carried the waiting, the rage, and the regret. the 3 heaviest burdens a human heart could bear. I drove home in a stupor. The 3 houses and their sorrows merged into one crushing entity inside me. I walked into my own living room, and there was Noah sitting on the floor, surrounded by his colorful plastic blocks, just as he had been weeks before. He looked up at me and gave me the bright, uncomplicated smile of a beloved child. "Hi, Mom," he said. I looked at my son, my beautiful, real, present son, and the full weight of Eleanor's lost boy, Marcus's lost future, and Amelia's lost daughter crashed down on me. The need to weep was a physical force, a tidal wave building behind my eyes. I opened my mouth, a sob catching in my throat. But nothing happened. The wave hit a wall of granite and receded. The 3 houses had taken their place inside me. Their walls were my walls now, and they were too strong to be broken by tears. I knelt on the floor in front of my son, the granite wall inside me holding back the flood. Noah, with the unerring instinct of a child, sensed the shift. He stopped playing with his blocks and put his small, warm hand on my cheek. "Are you sad, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. I looked into his clear blue eyes, a mirror of my own, and for the first time, I didn't offer a placid, practiced smile. I gave him the truth, or a version of it he could understand. "My heart is very full right now, sweetie. That's all." He accepted this as children do and went back to his castle. I stayed there on the floor watching him, feeling the 3 distinct sorrows settling into the foundation of my soul. Eleanor's patient grief was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. Marcus's silent fury was a live wire humming just beneath my skin. Amelia's hollow regret was an ache in my very bones. They were not mine, yet they were a part of me now. I was a living archive of pain. In the days and weeks that followed, the world changed. Or rather, I changed within it. The small annoyances of life, spilled milk, a traffic jam, a thoughtless comment from a stranger, lost their power to wound. They were like pebbles thrown against the thick, fortified walls of a castle. What was a spilled glass of juice compared to a son who never came home? What was a frustrating day at work compared to a lifetime of silenced music? My own small anxieties and sadnesses had no room to grow. The soil of my heart was already occupied by sorrows far grander and more profound. I became a better mother. My patience became nearly infinite. When Noah would have a tantrum, screaming with frustration over a toy that wouldn't work, I no longer felt my own anger rising in response. I felt Marcus's fury, the true volcanic rage of a stolen life, and Noah's small outburst was nothing. I could absorb it calmly, hold him, and wait for his storm to pass. When he fell and scraped his knee, his cries of pain didn't trigger my own panicked tears. I felt Eleanor's endless weight, the true agony of loss, and a scraped knee was a temporary, fixable wound. I could clean it, bandage it, and hold him with a deep, quiet calm that soothed him more than my tears ever could have. I visited my tenants again. I brought Mrs. Gable a new photo album for her pictures of Daniel. I sat with Marcus Thorne in his silent living room, and we didn't speak of music, but of the weather, of books, of the world outside his sparse walls. And I spent an afternoon with Amelia in her garden, helping her prune her roses, the ones she had named her daughter after. I became their silent confidant, their link to Evelyn, their landlord who understood that the rent they paid was not in money, but in the trust they placed in the walls around them. I was the caretaker of their stories. One evening, long after Noah was asleep, I took out Evelyn's letter one last time. I read the familiar, elegant script, but now the words were not cryptic. They were a perfect, luminous truth. These houses are more than just brick and mortar. They are stories, they are lives, and now they are your responsibility. You will know what to do when the time is right. And remember, my dear, some burdens are meant to strengthen our backs, not to be shed as tears. My grandmother had not cursed me. She had armed me. She knew the crushing weight of being a wife, a mother, a person in a world full of sharp edges. She knew that our own sorrows can sometimes be enough to break us. So she gave me the sorrows of others. She gave me the grief, the rage, and the regret of Eleanor, Marcus, and Amelia. And in carrying their burdens, I found I had the strength to carry my own. My back had been strengthened by the weight. I finally understood her stoicism, her rare smiles, her deep, rumbling laugh. It wasn't that she didn't feel. It was that she felt everything. She was a fortress, built to withstand the storms of life, protecting not only her own heart, but the hearts of those she chose to shelter. She hadn't left me 3 houses. She had left me a suit of armor. A few nights later, I was tucking Noah into bed. He was older now, almost 8, and his questions were becoming more complex. He was quiet for a moment, then looked at me seriously. "Mom," he said, "do you miss Grandma Evelyn?" "Every day," I whispered, and the truth of it was a familiar ache. "Do you ever cry for her?" I thought for a moment, feeling the familiar prickle behind my eyes, the memory of her lavender scent, the safety of her presence. And I felt the familiar walls rise up, strong and sure. The house of unending grief, the house of silent fury, the house of secret, hollow love. They held me up. I smoothed his hair back from his forehead and leaned down to kiss him goodnight. "I don't have to, sweetie," I said, my voice clear and steady. "It's all right. The crying gets done." And in the quiet of my son's room, surrounded by the fierce and simple love of my own life, I finally felt at peace with the silence of my tears. I was the keeper of the keys. I was the guardian of the stories. I was my grandmother's daughter, and my heart was full.